Hello, the following presentation is entitled Accessible by Design, Supporting Blind Users in Architecture Library Collections. My name is Amy Dye-Reeves, and I'm the head of the Library of Architecture, Design, and Construction at Auburn University in Auburn, Alabama. If you have any questions after this presentation has concluded, you can contact me at add0076@auburn.edu. So we have a short agenda today. First is the introduction, the problem, talking about inaccessibility in architecture collections, the principles of accessible collection development, hands-on practice in architecture libraries, and final tips and takeaways. So the purpose of this particular presentation is to raise awareness of the accessibility gaps that's within architecture library collections for blind and visually impaired, also for the abbreviation of BVI users. It really is to present the practical, proactive strategies to improve access through inclusion design. So I want to start with an opening thought. The study of architecture is a highly visual discipline, but does that mean that blind users are excluded by default? So keep this in mind as you're listening to the presentation. So we want to think about the problem, the inaccessibility in architecture collections. So oftentimes we think about the heavy visual content. So we think about the blueprints, the diagrams, the photo-heavy books, and the 3D models. Oftentimes, we find things of a lack of alternative formats. For example, it's a very few tactile graphics or braille labels or screen reader friendly text. Oftentimes, some of the discovery systems have poor metadata and catalog descriptions. Also, think about things about the physically accessed barriers, these oversized books, these inaccessible shelving and poor lighting, for example, all play a huge part in things are being inaccessible to architecture collections as a whole. So we're going to look at the different principles of making this an accessible collection and the development. So first you want to introduce a born accessible mindset. So materials that should be accessible from the very start. So first you want to look at a procurement policy. Really look at those vendors or those publishers that offer accessible formats. And some of those accessible formats for materials, looking at DAISY, EPUB 3, or tagged PDFs. Some formats and alternative is getting these tactile books. The encompassed these graphics, these really great graphics. That's also have audio descriptions for them with braille overlay. Accessible ebooks that are compatible with screen readers. And look at 3D printed models with tactile labels. Cataloging and metadata oftentimes will have accessible tags, but not all of them do. But it's kind of really prioritize those accessibility tags that are held within the cataloging and metadata records and these alt texts that will be within those records, and having those subject headings be part of those conversation when making the materials more accessible. So these hands-on practices, let's think about that. So looking at these tactile graphics and 3D models, you want to have a collaborative project with maybe your design students using some type of swell paper or Theraform or 3D printing to create a really tactile version of those plans, and looking at those descriptive narratives, your writing or your source, your text-based descriptions of the key visual materials. You're using an alt text within those digital collections or LibGuide, for example, and creating that LibGuide would be really helpful when you're looking at those descriptive narratives. Also looking at the accessible technology that's available to you, like a screen reader compatible within the OPAC or the metadata record. I'm looking at braille displays and audio interfaces in the main library spaces. Really using apps such as Seeing AI or Be My Eyes for support is also really helpful in terms of making some of this more accessible. looking at a user-centered design. So think about your users, how is it being centered, and then conducting these usability testing with blind users and really gather some data points to the input of your collection and how you can support them as a whole. So moving forward, how am I going to move forward? Build those partnerships with working with disability services at the university level and supporting them as the best you can. Um, Also working with some library vendors who might support this particular work that's being done. Advocate for accessibility within acquisitions, your budget, and institutional priority, making sure that everyone has a place at the table and can be able to access the materials that they so desire and so need for their projects. You also want to spend time on training your staff on having some accessible technology, some inclusive language, and universal design. I think one of the things that I've found that's been great is creating a LibGuide and having all this information here into one particular place, and also having hands-on opportunities for them, and really providing some of this makes it all more helpful in trying to make this a better accessible option when you're designing that for your patrons. So I want to leave you with some takeaways today. First one is accessibility isn't an add-on. It's a foundation for equitable library services. So the three key points is visual fields like architecture can be made accessible through creativity and collaboration, and accessible collections that benefit everyone. You do want to start small. Even a tactile label or an alt text can make a big difference in assisting your users. So it's going to be interesting, I think, to see where you might would go with this particular topic. If you have any questions for me or anything, you can be sure to email me. My email is add0076@auburn.edu, and I look forward to working with you. Thank you.